Welcome to the History of Ultimate in Minnesota podcast. In episode 4, James Huron sits down virtually with Santiago Escobar and discusses how he got into Ultimate, volunteering, and founding the Minnesota Wind Chill. Hi everyone, my name is James Huron and I use him, he, his pronouns, and today I'm going to be talking with Santiago Escobar. Santiago, why don't you introduce yourself and just give a brief overview of what you've done in Ultimate, and then we can dive into the details.
Sure. Hey, James. Good to see you. So like you mentioned, I'm Santiago Escobar. And for Ultimate Frisbee, one of the brief things I've done is that I play at the collegiate level a little bit. I played for D3 and 1D1 school during grad school. And then I was a local organizer for the college series for a few years. So I helped host tournaments for college. And then one of the items that kept me busy the most was the starting up the semi-pro team in Minnesota, the Minnesota Wind Chill, that was part of the AUDL, and was involved in that for about 5 or so years, and got the chance to do a lot of cool stuff with that, like meet a lot of cool people. So super, super rewarding experience.
Yeah. Then there's a lot to dive into there. Looking over your history and interactions with Ultimate, I kind of have 3 different categories in my mind. We have your played experience, and then your experience as an organizer and volunteer, and then your experience with the semi-professional Ultimate. And I think maybe if we kind of go in that order and tackle it category by category, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. All right, we'll do that. So let's start with your played experience. Where did you learn about Ultimate? Where did you start playing? When was that?
Yeah, so I attended St. Mary's University in Winona. Starting my first year was 2008, the fall 2008, and I was going there, with the intention of playing soccer and baseball, Division III, kind of like a walk-on. Coaches kind of knew my brother and me, but we weren't like fully recruited. And we came from a small school, so we appreciated the sense of going to a small school as well. And things just happened that all through high school, never got hurt, never got injured. And then preseason of soccer, then in the fall, first thing that happens, I get knee tendonitis, like first injury like I ever gotten for like anything,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like seeing the silence is like everything's just boring, because you can't do anything after playing every minute for 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
And then, but it's one of those things that I look back and it's a blessing in disguise, because during those things, it's like, like the team is away at a tournament and I'm still on campus. That's when I started to meet some cool people that kind of just started like pulling me into like these different things, and it was the second year of the program, of the Ultimate program at St. Mary's. So again, a pretty young crew, some experience, but it's not like you've seen like people that played in high school, a lot of them were like converting from other sports.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of got pulled in, and I'm super grateful always to those guys, because like they pulled me in, like they gave me this little atmosphere to compete in.
Right.
And kind of just went from there. And then when I healed up, I kind of was just like, I kind of just want to play this now.
Yeah.
And the soccer team was so big, it's like, they felt like they needed me anyway. So I just went to play Ultimate and just kept going there. And those guys and those girls in that team, they were just great for like the whole Ultimate experience and just college experience, and just learned so much through them. And it was just great doing that. And so I was at St. Mary's for 3.5 years.
Okay.
And pretty much all through that, just like learned a ton just around the atmosphere around Frisbee, hosting tournaments, because in Winona we were lucky that we had field space.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where like I learned more of like, this is not a regular tournament, it's like a whole different thing. It's like, the whole Saturday Sunday thing and all that. So that was just fantastic. So
yeah, that sounds like a great place to get started. Also mirrors my start to Ultimate too a little bit, where I came to college looking at one sport, and then Ultimate kind of drew me in a different direction, which I am very thankful for. So after your introduction to Ultimate at St. Mary's University, where'd you play after that?
So after that, I had another year in between that I was working. And then, because I'm originally from the Mankato area, so I live like half an hour south of Mankato, so that's like south central Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working, my first job out of college was in another town that was right by Mankato. And, just connected with a couple of the guys there, I started playing with them just kind of like here and there. And then I enrolled in grad school there to pursue my master's. And so I played with them a bit. Again, like those guys are light years better than I am, so I'm just like playing for fun with them. So I'm also grateful to them that they give me, like some space to like just go out there and play with them for a bit. And again, another super awesome group of guys and girls just playing the team in Mankato as well. And for them as well, it was cool to also see uh, the support that the university gave them as well, because they also had space,
Mm-hmm.
for hosting things. So they were able to host a little bit more and have a dedicated field for just them. So that was super fantastic too. But yeah, just in both clubs, in both schools, like it was just the atmosphere that the teammates created. That was pretty much like the main draw, no matter what. And super interesting, and maybe you can tell me how you saw it at your college as well. It's like how a lot of the players, like you get once in a while, you get someone like played high school, a little bit, and they didn't even know there was a team at that college and they just joined. But a lot of the players were just converting from either tennis or soccer, or like we had a bunch of like track and field people, So that was just fantastic to see like how many different skill sets were so easily transferable and just did so well in like in the new sport.
Yeah, I mean that was, especially starting out in college, that's exactly what happened. There was on the men's team people like from track and field, soccer, let's see here, baseball, those sports. On the women's team, there was a lot of track and field. There was softball. Softball was actually a big one. Hockey. So yeah, it was very interesting seeing all those skill sets come together. By the time I was at the end of college, my college, as an undergrad, there was more high school players coming, especially out of Minnesota, because I went to school in Eau Claire.
Yeah,
And so we
exactly.
started getting more and more high school players, which was very exciting. Like every year, like we'd have 2, and then like the next year there'd be like 4, and then the next year there'd be like 5, and we were like, whoa, this is we don't have to teach these kids how to throw. This is great.
Yeah. No, we had that. We had it in both schools. Like we had like a freshman come in. It's like, oh, actually, here's a better way to do this. And we're like, that's fantastic. Yes, let's do that. Yeah.
So you played at St. Mary's, you played at Mankato. Did you end up doing any club play at all?
Not really. And that was mainly because I would have loved to, but again, you guys are just so much better than I am in terms of skill level. But then the hard thing was that I was living down in Mankato area,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was hard to just be like 2 hours each way. And then I know we're going to talk about wind chill later on, but then I got involved with wind chill, so it just would have been too many things going on at once,
Right.
So I would be able to like fully dedicate the necessary time to it. But yeah, so club is the one thing I didn't get to really do.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you were, we'll talk about here in a second, you were very involved in organizing tournaments for club and that type of thing too. So that probably took up a lot of time, and, it shifted your focus away from playing and more towards volunteering and organizing. So why don't we start or transition over there then to your organizing and volunteer experience. So you said in St. Mary's you were playing, but you also kind of got some experience with running a tournament.
Mhm.
How did that transition to some of the other places that you organized and volunteered for? Because you started hosting college tournaments at St. Mary's, right?
Yeah. So part of the background there too is I was a sports management major. That was one of my degrees.
Okay.
So even before I got to college, like I already had like the whole thing about like creating brackets, and how to like better figure out like to get the most playing time for the most teams, and all that. So I always had like that mentality already.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got to St. Mary's, St. Mary's was partnering up, like having field space for Halloweenona, right? So I started learning some of the stuff from there when I was a first year, right? So I had no responsibilities for any of that in the first year and all that. I just like get in there and like, oh, this is how this is done. That's fantastic. And from there on, just like little by little, started learning more and more. And I graduated in December of 11, so I graduated early. But that fall is when I saw that USA Ultimate had the openings for a regional director for the college division. And it was, it's a volunteer role. And so I applied for it, and part of that role, right, the main responsibility is finding hosts for the different college series tournaments. And as you know, right, finding field space in the Midwest is, especially like for us in Minnesota, Wisconsin, like or Northwest Division, super difficult because even if you have the field space, I mean, it could be covering snow from one day to the other.
Yeah.
So that was tough. So it was hard to get bids, and I'm grateful that some schools they put in bids, but once in a while when there weren't any, then I was like, well, this tournament has to happen somewhere. So that's when I just started doing it myself. I would find fields near Mankato, found fields in Rochester, like different places all over the state, and just trying to find what could be sustainable, what could we do. And that was like the other big thing that all tournament organizers know this is that finding field space is not only hard just because of weather in the spring, but it's also super competitive. You're competing against like the local soccer association, like the local lacrosse team, for like the city or the town. And if you're like this outside organization coming in, it's like, hey, can I use your fields? Obviously, right? And totally understandable. Your priority is going to be like down here compared to like the local soccer club, lacrosse club, or whatever it might be, So that was always a challenge. But I'm fortunate that for the years that I was in that role, like we were always able to find space. Some spaces were better than others, but again, like sometimes with the weather that we had and whatever, we just had to take what we could. But we were lucky that we were always able to find enough space to fit all the fields that we needed. So that was good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so every spring it was always like, oh, is it gonna snow or not? And I remember that for one of the years I was in Mankato, that I sent an email out to all the captains like 3 days before, because the fields were green, but the forecast was like, it's going to snow. So on Saturday, right? So I sent the email to the captains. It's like, guys, we're going to postpone 1 week, because like USA Ultimate gives you like the 2 week, like you could do this weekend or that weekend. So I always aim for the later weekend because the later the better to give it more time to the fields.
Yeah.
And I had to make the call, like, we're going to have to postpone 1 more week. I get emails back like, why? Like everything looks fine and everything. Come Saturday morning, there's like 6 inches of snow in the ground. So I was like, guys, here we go. This is why we postponed a week. So you have to like spend money to get here and just turn right back. So yeah, so there like that would happen, like once in a while that we're just at the mercy of the weather, and we did what we could. So yeah, it was fun, but it was also like it's stressful, but the fun kind of stressful, like it's that stress that gets you like energized in the end. It's like it'll be something. It's like, oh, this is great. Like I can't wait to do it again, like in a couple of weeks. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it also, I think to an extent is somewhat of a thankless task, although I'm sure at least some amount of people were grateful and thankful for what you did. But I definitely know when I was in college and I didn't have the full context of what it took to run a tournament, when we arrived at a tournament or we were told we couldn't play due to weather or something like that, the person I, in my mind, wrongfully so, always blamed was the tournament director. I said, well, this is, why did we set it up this way if this is the result? And so, yeah, I mean, thanks for all the work and organizing that you were able to do around that.
And that was the thing, right? Like sometimes like I get it too, as a player, as a team, it's like, why can't we play? Like it looks so nice, it's green, but it's like, we don't own this field, like the city's doing us a favor by even letting us rent it. And of course they want it to look good the whole year. And if the grass is still like coming up, they're like, we don't want people in cleats for no lower place for 24 hours, for those 2 days.
Right. Ruining the field for the whole summer.
Like those conversations to have.
Yeah. So you hosted some college tournaments. You were regional director for the men's college division for 5 years, it looks like 5 or 6 years with USAU. But you also have quite a list of other volunteer and organizing positions. You did some organizing with the YCC and the high school league for Minnesota Ultimate as well.
Yeah, so all the credit to that goes again to the board. Back then, like when I first met Bruce, like I just saw everything that Bruce did, I was like, this guy's amazing. Like, oh, how he is able to pull his teams together and have all these resources together. So I learned a lot from just watching what he did, and now watching like what Tina does and what the board does. So I've always been able to just come in and volunteer, and I know like how much work goes in the background just getting to that day of being able to come in and volunteer. And so I've been volunteering with the state tournament and YCC, and then like how the US Open became ICC too, for probably about, I'm thinking the first year I did it was 2010, because I think I was still at St. Mary's. And I mean, like this last year was the first year that I didn't, right? But because obviously we couldn't, but like, so that's always been something like, I know like every weekend after Memorial Day, I know what I'm doing.
Yep.
So yeah. So those have always been super fun. And again, like that was a great chance to just to like see people that I played against in college, like see like, oh, now like be able to like see guys from the wind chill, and so on. So it's been a fun weekend just to go out and help out.
Yeah, for sure. Now I'm curious because you also had an opportunity to volunteer at some world championships in 2014 and 2015. So I'm curious, you can tell people what those events were, but how did that come about?
Yeah. So in 2014, it was the World Ultimate Club Championships in Lecco in Italy. And how that came about was that, so like that's a tournament, it's hosted by the World Flying Disc Federation. And at that point, I was already involved with wind chill, right? So just some conversations that I've had with like other players, other people. And we also had Minnesota being represented there, like you and all the folks from Dragon were already going to be representing Minnesota and representing the U.S. at the championships. So with all that, just knowing about it, and then with my desire of like hosting more events, and just like learning more from all these events. So like, okay, like what else do we need to know? What else do we need to do? What are the things I haven't thought about yet, to go like this large scale? I was like, this is the perfect chance to just like get closer and get behind the scenes to like just learn so much more about it. So I just talked to some of the organizers, and they were like, oh yeah, we need pretty much anything we can get in terms of volunteers. So I volunteered with them, and they were hosting the senior, I guess you want to call it that, the World Ultimate Champion. They were also hosting juniors.
Okay.
And so that was just super cool just to like go see, okay, what setup do you have? What kind of like system do you have in place? What operating procedures do you have in place? And just learn a ton more of like what goes from like college, right? There's like a weekend with like 12 teams that just come in and leave the same day, right? And then come back the next day and just leave the same day. YCC, who has grown to be a multi-day situation, and then US Open, and then having something of like the stage of Worlds where you have teams flying out from other countries, and what do you need to do to create the best hospitality possible? Like all of that was a huge learning experience. And again, at the same time, I'm doing my sports management degree, so all of that was just like tying together. It's like, this is like an amazing world just to like be involved in and be a part of, and be able to contribute in any way we can. And as one is, I get to watch Dragon win Worlds. That was fantastic.
So you said you're a volunteer. Did they provide housing for you? Did they provide meals? Like, was there any help with the cost of flying out to Italy and volunteering there? So
the flying, the getting there and back, that's on everyone, because man, they have volunteers coming from everywhere, right? So, but once you're there, they help you out, figure out housing, figure out meals, all that like stuff that we would do for volunteers here as well, so they had kind of that built in. And that also like made it great, because some of the people I volunteer with, like I still chat with a couple times here and there, like some of the people that were like in like the same quarters that I was in. Someone playing in Northern Ireland, some of them are playing in Taiwan, so like super cool opportunity just to like meet people from all over, just from like that common interest that was Ultimate, So yeah, so that was super cool. And that's where, like having these conversations, that's where I learned like, oh, by the way, next year there's the European Championships in Denmark, like does anyone want to come? And I was like, sure, Denmark sounds amazing too, you know?
Right.
So then the next year, I got a chance to go to Copenhagen for the European Championships, and smaller, right? Because it's just a European teams, not club, it's the national teams.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and even though it's the same atmosphere or environment, you know, if you want to call it that,
Mm-hmm.
it had a totally different feel from Worlds, you know, like the way it was, like how things went and everything. So
Yeah.
again, like something like so great learning opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it seems like you enjoyed it because you went from Italy to Denmark then the next year and did it right again. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we're close to closing out some of your organizing and volunteering experiences with Ultimate. I think you were also a tournament director for the Pro Flight finale in 2015.
Oh, yes. I can't remember if that was the first year of the Triple Crown or was one of those first years of the Triple Crown.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point I was, you know, like I've met David Raffalo before from USAU. Obviously, like I met Bruce, you know, everyone from the board, Jake, you know, working with Minnesota Ultimate. And it kind of just came up with like, why don't we host this? You know, I'm like actually seeing like the USA Ultimate was just like, oh, we're gonna have this event in Colorado and this in Philadelphia. And I was like, well, why don't we have something here?
Mm-hmm.
And it just came to me as like, well, yeah, let's do it. You know, and like thanks to the support of the board and Minnesota Ultimate, they were like, let's do it. Like if you take on the responsibility of like going, like leading this, you know, like it was great to have the backing of Minnesota Ultimate, because Minnesota Ultimate like helped with like the figuring out the contract for the fields, you know, the communication with USAU.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I had to worry about was the competition aspect with the teams, the communication with the teams.
Mm-hmm.
So that was super cool to like have that partnership, you know, with that team. Made the role of tournament director a lot easier when like the main thing you have to worry about, you know, instead of having to go find fields and all that, is like actually like figure out the competition format and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just super cool just to have all those different like, you know, like super high elite level teams coming to Blaine for a few days, and it was just super cool. I remember the main thing we had, and I keep remember, is like I think it was the Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening that we had a tornado warning. So we were like, all right, everyone to their cars. We'll make the call later, see what happens.
Yep, I
but
remember
that was
that.
the thing that happened. Yeah. So, but if it wasn't for that, it would have been perfect. But I think that's the main thing. And I think that some of the feedback we got afterwards for the tournament was like, it was too windy. I'm like, well, if that was the worst comment I'll get, I'll take it. No worries. I'm happy with that one.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I also know that having that tournament now, the U.S. Open recently has been held in Minnesota as well. That's a huge, like, it just makes playing a season so much more accessible if you're on a team going to those tournaments. So, you know, thank Jake as well for making that a possibility, because that's one less plane ticket then that ends up, you know, being on everyone's radar for the whole year.
Agreed. And that's why I want to give a ton of credit to, you know, like the organization as a whole, you know, because just besides that as well is, I just think it's so good. And the whole point I started doing it too is just because it's so good for exposure.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And how cool is it for kids that are just starting high school to be able to, like, instead of having to go to Colorado or whatever a tournament be, just drive up to Blaine and watch, you know, Dragon play against some of the other best teams in the country, you know, or watch, or be able to watch Boston Brute Squad play, you know, or watch, you know, like Revolver play. How cool is that for someone to just be able to drive up and do that? So
yeah, absolutely. So you also have a one more kind of aspect with your Ultimate career, and that is the wind chill. I think you began getting involved with that process in 2012, and maybe just start out. How did that process begin? How did how did you get started with thinking about having a semi-professional team here, and just what is that whole process like, I guess?
Yeah. So I graduated in the fall of 2011, right, from St. Mary's with my undergrad degrees. And, you know, and because it was like, well, like, you're kind of like in between, like, so you're still kind of like, still connected to the team a bit and trying to do all of this. And at that point, I was also hosting the college series, right? So I got to see some of my teammates quite a bit still in that spring. And one of my teammates actually, Brandon, Matt, he's the one he's one of the ones that is like, hey, this thing is like a thing that's happening, and we're trying to figure like, oh, like this is cool, and then I started looking more into it and I saw like, well, they're all like over here. And then that's when the expansion plans were like, oh, we want to expand to all these different cities. And they had their map out, like where they wanted to expand. And the Midwest just has like a hole in it. It's like, there's like nothing to it. So I'm like, why is this a thing? Because at that point, like I'm aware already about YCC. I'm aware of like our college scene, I'm aware of our club scene. It's like, how can Minnesota, one of the hot spots, at least in my opinion, but I don't think I'm alone in that opinion, like one of like the ultimate beds in the country, not even consider for like an expansion team. And just getting curious, just like, again, sports management degree, like in that mentality, just because like, I want to email these guys and be like, why, how do you make this call? Like, how do you pick this different cities? Or was it just like darts, or like, what was your process? And pretty much it came down to like, well, we don't have an interested party there. Like, we don't, like, who would do it? And pretty much one thing led to us, like, I just got out of college, I have some time. I'll take it. I'll do it, So we continued the conversation, and I got the rights for the territory. And that's how it started. So I got the rights in the spring of 2012 for the team then to start for the 2013 season. Because I think 2012 was the actual first season of the ADL, if I remember correctly. So we were like in the first class of expansion, I guess, if you want to call that.
Right.
Yeah. So I became the youngest semi-pro team owner probably in any sport. I don't know if it's just Ultimate, but like probably in a sport, because at that point I was 21 or 22.
Yeah, I remember what I was doing when I was 21 or 22, and trying to run a semi-professional team is not, I would not have succeeded.
And I saw like, because like, I'm not like a elite player or anything, like, so people didn't know who I was. I played at D3 school, whatever. So like, as my name started getting around, I remember I went to a couple tournaments, and someone said like, oh, the owner, the new pro team is here. And people were looking around, like, I think people were picturing or imagining that I was like a 65-year-old guy, like, like, and they're like, oh, it's like this kid. I was like, oh yeah, it's like, I'm 22, it's fine. Don't worry, we'll figure it out.
Oh, that's kind of funny. Okay, so you get the rights to the territory, and you have basically a year to set up, because the inaugural season was starting, and you knew the Wind Chill's first season wouldn't start for the following year. What are some of the main things that you had to prepare for in that year?
So the main things, first, number one, was venue, right? Because there are some check boxes that we need to check about just any venue, no matter where to go, like the field size, scoreboard, box score, press box, accessibility for all these different things that players need, anything that we want to be able to do with fans, so like that was a big one. And that's one of the ones that took a lot of time, because there were all these different places, but one is like, oh, cool, finally check all the boxes. And then it's like, oh, actually, they're not available at all, or like they're already like super booked, or if it was a real grass place, or like we want to save our grass, we don't want to start that early, which again, I totally get, part of being in Minnesota, So that's why I had to start looking more into like the stadiums that had turf, so that's where we started like looking more at all the different colleges and so on. And part of this search, like, again, like a lot of people were super helpful in this process, trying to find places. So that was one thing. And then the second thing, right, and actually I wouldn't rank it, but like I would say that equally important was actually getting the talent, on board. That was like the big thing, especially because at that point there was still a lot of like, what is this? What is the AUDLs? end goal? What are they after? And my only thing with the AUDL was like, I just want to like get more exposure for the sport. Like that's like the main thing I was going after.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have that conversation of like, oh, what are you doing at school? Are you still like playing soccer, playing baseball? It's like, no, I'm playing Ultimate. And then pretty much the next question is automatically like, what is that, right?
Right.
It's not an automatic thing of like, oh yeah, I totally know what that is. I've seen that, whatever. So like exposure was like pretty minimal outside of our circles.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like my main motivation behind it, just to like start to get that going. And to do that, right, we needed just fantastic talent to be on board as well.
Yeah, so you took that year, found a venue, getting kind of the team and talent set up. Then you had the first season. So I guess just more of a general question. Describe that first season. How were you feeling? Were you nervous, excited? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the successes?
Yeah. I think the main success was getting the buy-in, and I have to give a shout out. Like a lot of that credit, I would say goes to Mike Peterson. He like I felt like he was the one. He was one of the ones that like had more of the influence of like, okay, guys, let's try this out. Let's make Minnesota look good. So I can't thank Mike enough for that. And then just thank for all the guys, like including you, like for like taking the chance of like, what is this thing, and showing up for a tryout at 9 p.m. on a Saturday for the first year, and then all of you guys agreeing to like sign in and being part of it. Because I know that first year we learned a lot of stuff. Like we all together learned a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And every year we succeeded, but if we stick to that first year, like on paper, we had a fantastic roster. Like we had multiple levels of experience, but we had a fantastic roster that I think on paper, if you would have gone to a regular tournament, that would have taken first place, no question. But as we went to the season, like we learned like the whole like back-to-back things. We're like, that was killer.
Yep.
And driving, I don't know if you guys remember the very first road trip that we had. We had Indy and Cincinnati, and we're driving down to Indy. I remember I'm in the car with Austin Lee, Pat Niles, and all these guys that were in one of the bands. And we have like, I think 3 different bands that we have driving down there. We get there, we get to Indy. We get our first win right away, which I'm like, awesome. Take that one off the list.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to worry about that. And then we go to Cincinnati the next day, and we lose by 1. And we're like, how can we lose by 1? Our team is amazing. And that's when we started learning more about like, this is a whole different beast, like the nature of like playing at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And then we learned a lot more about the sources, because then we had to drive back. So this one part, like we had to drive back, 12 hours or something like that if you don't stop. And yeah, so those were some of those things that, again, like not only year one, but every year that I can say enough to all the guys that have been involved in the team about how thankful I am of your willingness to spend a weekend with me and the rest of the team, for doing these things. And because I know it's a big ask,
Mm-hmm.
it's a huge ask to say like, hey, we're going to drive to 12 hours to play one game and come back, so, but I'm glad all the guys are motivated behind it. We had some guys that like put a lot of time and effort into that team. So year one was a lot of learnings in terms of like, okay, what do we need to do? How can we better prepare, And at the end of the year, like I had some feedback about that as well, which I thought was fantastic. Like the whole like, hey, the 12 passenger vans are not going to work for us. And I'm like, I totally agree with you. You're right, because we're just following what other teams were doing, right? Because it was working for them.
Mm-hmm.
But again, some of these teams only had to drive like 4 hours or whatever, and we were like a little more, not isolated, but we're a little more distant geographically.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when we started like looking into, okay, how can we get a bus instead, so it's at least a little bit more comfortable, and by year 3 or 4, we were able to figure out like, how can we fly at least one game to like figure that out, like going to Detroit or whatever we had to do. And I think in the end, it feels like maybe little things, but those are the things that helped in terms of like team chemistry, just like if everyone's in like the same bus instead of like 4 separate vans together, I feel like there was an amount of like the team chemistry that helped as well,
Mm-hmm.
and there'll be like those like one the morning conversation. The thing was Matt Burkhardt that was like, it's a hot dog a sandwich. You know, like really. So it was just great conversation that happening all the time. So yeah, so that was like the main thing. Like each year we learn something else. Okay, like what else can be done so all the players feel like they're in an even better spot to succeed, you know, in the role in the team.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And being a part of those early teams was also a lot of fun. So appreciate the leap you took there and all the work that you put in. You have had a lot of experience, both with the semi-pro ultimate, which we know is different than like club, college ultimate. I want you just to kind of think and compare those two. What do you think some of the pros are when you're looking at playing or managing semi-pro ultimate, and what are some of the cons when compared to club or college ultimate?
For the managing aspect, I think for semi-pro, the main plus was that we knew that no matter where we went, well, this is the sense I got, and you can tell me as a player if you felt differently, but we knew that whenever we went, it's like, okay, like the older ownership group, you know, the older team has a space for us, you know, like the standards are all around, like we're going to have a locker room, you know, like we have a place to like park our bus, you know, like we have all this different like things that might seem small, but like we have something figured out. So I think that was the main plus. So there were some like standardization across the board. So that was fantastic in my opinion. But the main con was like that big ask of time, you know, in terms of we were gone every weekend, you know,
Right.
like, yeah. So that was a big commitment. So, and with club, right, or college, you know, like for college season, yeah, like you might be gone like 3 weekends in September, 3 weekends in April, right? But you can match that with the rest. And that's pretty much like your season condensed. But we were gone like the whole summer, you know, like we had 12, 16 weeks that we were on the road. Or if we were at home, you know, like I was at the stadium from like 6 a.m. until like 11 p.m. Just like getting stuff set up, getting stuff ready and all that. So I think those would be the main things that would come to mind.
Yeah. And then you were with the Wind Chill until I think 2017. Is that right?
Yeah. So I finished the 2016 season. And so like that between 2016 and 2017 is when I stepped away.
Okay. And what was the motivation behind stepping away from Wind Chill?
So a couple of things. So the main thing is that I was getting married in 2017, and my priorities is like I want to be with Kelly as much as I can, you know, and I don't want to be gone like every weekend throughout the summer, you know. So that was like a no-brainer for me, you know. Like I love Kelly and she's fantastic, and you guys are great too, you know. But
Not as great as Kelly, I'm sure.
So like that was a big one. And then I was also, you know, just moved to the Twin Cities too, you know, within the last year, which in theory you would think it'll make it easier, right? Because I think all of you guys knew that I was living down in the Mankato area. I was driving out for practice whenever I could, driving out for games, getting all the events for like the weekends, you know, and all that, and making that commute, you know, a 2-hour commute each way. But even though I was living in the cities already, I also had a different job. So it was also smart career-wise to like, okay, like you can't, you know, like you need to like focus on this. And third, you know, like I hope, you know, like I feel like I did my part of like, okay, my job was to get this established, get this going, you know, get some credibility behind it, get some, I mean, amazing talent on the field, you know, and really off the field. And that's like the other thing, like some of the people that helped out behind the scenes, oh man, like again, like you're saying, a thankless job, but they were amazing. You know, Emily Allen, she did a ton of awesome videos for us. Taylor Benusri did a lot of stuff for us. Skylar, Vincent, Ryan Kemp, Luke Sack, they pretty much same as me, we just wore all the hats, we did everything. And it was just amazing to be able to be like, I know that Luke is going to be there because Luke is, he's committed. He loves this. Same for Ryan, same for Vincent, same for Emily, Taylor, Skylar. Everyone was always like happy to be there, And I knew if we were in the crunch too, like my parents would show up and like run the concession stand, My sister would run the tickets at the front, So super, super thankful to all of them for being able to do all of that. But at that point, I felt like I did what I could to make it to where it was, And at that point, it was probably for the best interest of just the team as a whole, to like go to someone else that could do more with it, that had more time to put to it, like had like had ideas, because we have, and Kelly and I had we had no shortage of ideas, but there was just not enough time to put all the ideas in there. I would have loved to had a a women's team as well. And that's why I'm so glad that the strike came along. And I'm super, super supportive of the strike. And I can't wait to be able to go to a game for them, because that's one of the things I'm like, I wish we could have done this and we just didn't have the capacity to do it, in terms of time, personnel, all of that. So those are some of the things I'm glad that now that I'm not involved anymore, things are happening either within or completely as a new wave, the strike being their own independent organization as well. It's been so cool to go to that. And Kelly and I went to the kickoff party, and it was just so cool to hear what they're doing. So that was fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those are the main reasons.
Yeah. And I was actually going to ask because if any listeners don't know, there was, and still is probably, even though everything's been put on hold for a while, controversy with the wind chill current ownership and whether or not they're doing enough to help semi-pro women's ultimate, help issues around equity and that type of thing. Was any of that on your radar when you were working with Windchill?
What part? If there was support towards it?
It just the current ownership of Windchill back in 2019 was a lot of community members felt they weren't doing enough to help support women's ultimate, since they owned a men's ultimate team, and there were a lot of people in the community saying, "Hey, we think you should be doing more to help support women's ultimate." And I'm curious if you had any sense or any communication to you about those issues when you were a part of Windchill.
Not that I'm aware of. And again, whatever the current ownership is doing, I have no clue what the strategy is or anything. And again, the decision to go that way, that's is their call, on that, or how they want to do it. But I had no indication either way. And again, it could have been one of those things maybe I just missed it. I hope I didn't. But I don't know what the current ownership is planning to do, but it's nothing that, at least when I was involved, so what now, 3-4 years ago,
right,
that was to my knowledge, especially because at that point the league hadn't come up yet, right? The women's league, yeah, so hadn't fully come out. They were building, but we didn't have a team yet. We didn't know enough about it yet.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can't agree with you more about the excitement around the Minnesota strike as well. I didn't get to go to that party, but I did sponsor Ann and I sponsored one player or something. But yeah, 2020 was a bummer. Still, I guess 2020 still has been a bummer. Yeah. But yeah, I'm excited to see what they're able to do, if anything, this year, but in the near future, hopefully. So, so you stepped away from the Windchill in 2017. And have you done anything related to Ultimate since then?
I mean, not fully. I have volunteer at YCC, volunteer at state, things like that. But I haven't done any heavy lifting, if you will, because for YCC and state, again, Tina and all that team, they put everything together and make it easier for you to just show up and help out, which if I can say that, if you have the time I would totally encourage you to do that. Like it is always a super rewarding experience just to be around that environment, watch the high school teams play, watch YCC, and be part of that effort.
Mm-hmm.
I totally encourage you to like look up those volunteer opportunities and sign up because it's super rewarding. And that team, the organizing team, makes it super easy for you to volunteer as well.
Sorry, you caught me mid-drink there. Um, yeah, so you're still volunteering. Do you have any big plans for Ultimate in the future at all?
So, so this is the thing. I don't know how feasible it is right now because of COVID, right? But I still look for fields. Don't get me wrong. Like Kayla would be driving somewhere. I was like, look at that place. I bet you I could fit 8 fields there. You know, I'll do that. So I still look for fields. I try to build some of those relationships to find, like the right places, the right moments, the right situations, and all that. I would love to get back into the hosting,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll see how things keep progressing, And again, the big question here is like, okay, is the field going to be ready and not like snowy? That's a whole different thing to take on,
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to do more of that. I will love to keep doing as much as I can, with making YCC, ICC, state, like this like big events, even though it's like a little thing here, a little thing there.
Mm-hmm.
We'll love to continue to help making those as successful as they can be. Um, and I wouldn't be opposed of having more bigger events in our area. If it's not Blaine, where else nearby that we could do something?
Mm-hmm.
Because in my opinion, the more exposure we get, the more natural like Ultimate's going to become in like our sport ecosystem. And even if you think about the youth sport ecosystem, and I feel like that's being already, since I left St. Mary's,
Mm-hmm.
like so in the last decade, that has changed so much already. Like you said, right? Like now pretty much a ton of high schools around the Twin Cities now have a team,
Mm-hmm.
and back then I feel like, wait, like there's a team in a high school?
Mm-hmm.
And back then like, the only ones we would hear about were like Hopkins or Edina, and now like all the high schools like around them like have teams as well. So what would it take for that to go next level? Like where else can we go like outside the metro, like the greater Minnesota
Mm-hmm.
area?
Yep.
But that would take a lot of like local support as well, local volunteers as well to run it because it's a whole different geographic challenge.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to see. I mean, we'll see what happens with COVID this year, but yeah, I think that all of those ideas sound really great, and I think it'd be a lot of fun to see some of those come to fruition.
Mhm.
So
So hopefully,
hopefully, yeah,
yeah.
fingers crossed. So looking at you've been involved with Ultimate in some way for, I'm going to do some math on the fly here, 13 years, I think. 14 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
About that, you've been an organizer, volunteer, an owner, a player. Do you, and you've thanked quite a few people here already, but do you have any other people or shout outs you want to thank or anything you want to shout out here before we close this out?
Oh man. I think I can't emphasize enough with all the people that do a lot of stuff in the background, so whatever event we're thinking of, if we're thinking like state, like Bruce, and his team, now Tina, Jake, everyone at Minnesota Ultimate, Fort Winchell, like I told you some of the team members that I had there that were fantastic. Emily did amazing work, Taylor, Luke, Ryan, Camp, Vincent, you know, um, so that was always fantastic to have people there. Having Chris being a PA announcer, that was super fun as well.
Mm-hmm.
So just like all those people that like make stuff happen in the background. And when you're a fan, if you're just attending, like those are things that might go for granted, but if they weren't there, if we didn't have Chris, like if we didn't have Becky, like it would have been a totally different atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And then on the field, uh, thanks to pretty much everyone that at one point put on that jersey, for the windshield. And I still have my jersey. Like I have it. Like I was like, this is like the jersey that represented, like this was like my baby for like at that point, and I'm glad to see like still going strong. And at the same time, everyone that put on the referee jersey, because I know that was not an easy job. That was a big ask, and there were a lot of people that put on the referee jersey for the windshield games throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also a big thank you for that one. Yeah. So in the end too, like all the guys at St. Mary's, because they're the ones that got me into the sport first.
Mm-hmm.
So all those guys from that were a year older than me, and they were just like, "Come try this out. It'll be great. It'll be good." Because that's where it all started, and hopefully like that the story will keep going. So
yeah. So Santiago, I really appreciate you sitting down with me here on this Sunday morning. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for listening. The History of Ultimate in Minnesota podcast is a project run by volunteers hoping to spotlight amazing stories of Ultimate in Minnesota. If you are interested in helping out, please visit minnesotaultimate.org. A huge thanks for this episode goes out to Santiago Escobar for the interview, Minnesota Ultimate, and discdish.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time with more History of Ultimate.